Hello. Another session of OTC Unplugged, where we introduce the consultants of our company to you. And we are so proud of each one and every one. And that's such unique characters, but we're all working together to serve our clients. And today, I have a privilege to interview a woman. We don't have a lot of engineering women. And Davida is not an engineer, but she survived in this engineering environment. With a lot of knowledge and learn how to work with that and support our team of consultants. So what a privilege to talk with Davida van der Walt today. Hello, Davida, and welcome.
Hi, Wilhelmine, welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad you immediately said I'm not an engineer. But I sometimes feel like one.
It's so funny. I had to introduce myself in a working group the other day, and I started in saying, I'm not a typical engineer, but I'm also not a typical woman. And how many of us feel we are typical, but yeah, it's a different environment to be in. Yeah. So Davida, start off by telling me a little bit about who is Davida, where you grew up, and where you are now.
Okay. Oh, that's a long story, Wilhelmina.
It's a long story. I'll be quiet for a while.
Okay. So I was born in Pretoria, and straight after that went to varsity in Raul after finishing school. And I studied industrial psychology. So I went all through to my master's, and I completed my industrial psychology internship as well and registered as an industrial psychologist. And I started working immediately at Sasol when I finished my studies. I actually started after finishing my honors, and I did my master's part-time, and I did my internship at Sasol. Sasol was the most amazing training ground. You can ask anybody who used to work with Sasol in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. I started there in 94, and I would never be able to quantify what I've learned there. It was really, if I think back today, it's probably one of my major highlights, is getting my education. And I'm saying now, I had my base education at Raul, but my real education I had at Sasol. So I started off in HR, having done industrial psychology. And when you start at HR in Sasol, you do everything. So you're not appointed to do recruitment or training, and because I had to do my internship, I literally had to get exposed to every function of HR, which was incredible. What I really enjoyed was the training, the amount of training I went through, and especially on the soft skills, people skills, motivational skills, conflict management. That was just fantastic. So for my master's, I did 360-degree competency assessment. And I had the opportunity to work with SASTEC, which at the time was the Sasol Technology Project Planning and Execution League. And doing that, I got to know the project environment. That was my first exposure to the project environment. And I will never forget this. After I've done all my work, and I learned facilitation was probably one of the skills that I learned early in my career that I really enjoyed a lot, because in training you facilitate, if you do competency assessment and you facilitate workshops, developing the competencies for groups, you facilitate. So I did a lot of facilitation training, had most amazing Prof. Fransel here he was at the Pretoria University at the time. I'm sure everybody in facilitation knows Prof. Fransel here. If you don't, get to know him. Most amazing man. Very, very peculiar man, but very amazing. So I did many of his courses. And then one day, one of the technology managers came to me, and he saw me doing facilitation on the competency assessment. And he said to me, Davida, I've got a job for you. And I'm like, okay. He says, I want you to facilitate a technology strategy. And I'm like, what is that? And he said, he gave me a number of somebody who specializes in that. And he said, go and get training and come back. And at that stage, it was coal gasification. He said, come back and facilitate a strategy for me. And now this is not business strategy, but it needs to talk to business strategy. So I went and I learned all about technology strategy, about push and pull and, et cetera, et cetera. And it was so amazing. I facilitated my first session in Secunda, loved it, at the most amazing time. And the rest was history. So very soon after, I was pulled into SASTEC and I left head office. And for the rest of my career, I stayed in projects. And I literally learned everything about projects. But initially, because I was such an oddball and not being an engineer and loving this facilitation, which nobody else likes, I started doing business strategy and technology strategy and the alignment thereof. So I started facilitating all the business strategies for Sasol, for the various business units, and in the process, aligning the technology strategies with that by facilitating that with the subject matter experts. Incredible experience. In the process, and this is actually where I met Freek. So I want to tell you where I met Freek. Now, we all know who's Freek by now, I'm sure. So I walked into my boss's office, Tim, and he said to me, I want to introduce you to somebody. I'm like, okay. So I walk into this office, and here sits this man, his glasses behind his computer. And he's talking to this computer and he says, come look, quick. He doesn't know me from a bar of soap. He says, come look. And he's busy. At that stage, this was like 2000, so I'm talking many years back. He was developing this software where you talk and it transcribes the stuff we use today, which is today it's common, and even our meetings that we record today transcribes. But he was testing that because he was tired of writing and he wanted to talk to the computer and it must write what he wants to say. So it was so funny. After a while, he did give up. The technology wasn't as good then as it is today. And so I met Freek. And at that stage, Sasol bought Kandaya, which was an international company in chemicals. They were diversifying into chemicals. And I became part of the project rolling out the stage gate process, the BD&I business development and implementation process. And so there was a technical integration team and a business integration team. So we formed the technical integration team. We started traveling the world, working with the Americans, the Italian. We were in Germany a lot, in Holland, where we rolled out the stage gate process and we aligned and we gathered best practices and pulled it all together. Another amazing learning experience. And in all of that, I got very, very involved with what Sasol calls the BD&I, the business and implementation model. But that is essentially the project stage gate model. So I became part of the core team who developed the stage gate model for Sasol and improved on it. And we went to the extent of developing JV models, upstream models, downstream models, HR models, IT models, organizational change models, you name it, all based on stage gate principles. So I really managed to get the thing is, if you start working with that stuff, and if you look at the full value chain from front-end loading, your pre-feasibility, feasibility, your feed stages through to execution, if you get involved in your stage gate processes, you actually learn the full project execution process by doing that. And I worked with such amazing subject matter experts who just dumped their knowledge and skills. They weren't scared to share, So that was such an exciting time. I'm rolling on. Can I roll on, Benjamin?
I want to take you back and then we can carry on. I want to take you back to your childhood.
Oh.
Is there any stories in your childhood? If you look back at it now, you say, I should have known that there's some industrial psychology or this process development around stage gate or this facilitation that you've been doing. And we can't always make a connection, but I would like to hear a story that you say,
okay,
you know what, if I look back at that time, I could already see little Davida had this in her. You want to share that with us?
I think so. You make me think a bit, though. So I've always been good at bringing people together, and for good or bad. So, so
I want
cool.
now I want a good and a bad story.
So it's cool. I tend to be a little bit naughty at times, and I would really rile up people to do naughty stuff. And, and I'm not talking bad naughty. In the German class, for instance, if we were only 8 in the class taking German, and when I didn't feel like going to class, I would actually motivate the whole class to just lie on their arms and do nothing when the teacher comes in. So I had the ability to motivate people to do what I wanted them to, which is terrible, I know. But I think that is maybe one of the stories, and I can relate a few examples like that. But also, I think I've always enjoyed training. For me is a real passion. So I've always enjoyed transferring information and so forth. So I attended debating. Was one of my core. I did everything at school. My mom always said I was never home. I did everything. So that was me. And she eventually thought I'm enjoying this so much. So she sent me for drama classes. So I even attended drama classes. But what that taught me, which speaks to the industrial psychology, is today I can speak with confidence in front of people with ease, for training, for facilitation, for whatever. And I learned to read people, and to look at people dynamics and, make it my own. So I definitely think it was there. Yes, yeah. I think if I look back now, I think it was all there.
So we are officially going to dub you the drama queen in OTC.
Hey.
And then I'm at least a little bit off the hook at this stage.
Oh, God. Okay.
I never did drama at school, and I wish I would have done that. I can see the value, and both of my children have done it in high school, and I can see the difference. It's absolutely valuable. But I love how you say you bring people together, but not just you bring them together. It feels to me there's like this motivation. You bring them together to do something, not just for the fun of it, but to motivate and inspire them to go. So where are you bringing people together currently?
So at the moment, I'm working on a contract with one of the petrochemicals in South Africa, and it's probably one of the most amazing jobs I've had in a long time. I'm really enjoying it. We're looking at the stage gate, and what I'm doing differently, a lot of the work that I had in these stage gate processes were very siloed, and none was integrated. So when I started, for the first 2 months, I just looked at all the documentation they had, all these standards, procedures, slide packs, and I very quickly realized that when people wanted to do projects, they didn't know how to. So maybe I must just go one step back. So last year, they asked me to come in and do an assessment. They had high turnover, a lot of low morale, and I said, please come and help us identify what's the problem. Okay, so I did facilitate a OD intervention, organizational development intervention. And then I quickly realized that when any project practitioner is on a project, they don't know where to start. There's so many versions of what they're supposed to do, and that it takes them much longer to just find out what to do before they can actually get to doing it. So they got so frustrated, and then they would do something, and then management would say, no, but that's not the way we do it. You should do it this way. And all of these guides and standards and procedures exist, but they're in different formats, different versions. So nobody knows where to start and stop. So the process I'm in now, and I'm so glad they asked me to help close the loop, is to streamline the project delivery process and stage-gated process so that we really integrate everything. So I've got the opportunity to work with the project managers, the engineers, the document controllers, the project controllers, the contracting guys, all the discipline engineers. But now in their case, because a lot of the projects are smaller projects, there's a lot of operations, reliability and maintenance inputs. So I'm also looking at their processes and integrating it all into a single process so that from pre-feasibility, you can work through a single set of deliverables of what we should do, who should do it, how we should do it. And it's clear. So we're taking all the ambiguity away. And this is making such a difference. I'm so enjoying it because you can see people are desperate for guidance and the one way. Just give me the one way of doing it. And
I must say, as an engineer as well, there were times as a junior engineer when you start something and you try to get the right way, and people might not even tell you. And then if someone say, no, man, do it this way, like, why didn't you tell me in the beginning? It's so frustrating. And it's so interesting to me, Davido, where you say that you were asked to come in to look at turnover and low morale, but at the end it was a technical thing, I almost wanted to say, that impacted turnover and morale. Don't you find sometimes we must be so careful to just jump and say, maybe we need to pay them more. Maybe we need to give them better cafeteria. And I know those were all the things that was always said, but there's often other things behind it. And how do you go about to find these other things behind what's really like a root cause analysis, but not a superficial one, really to get to the root of the root of the root?
Yeah, so root cause analysis is definitely a tool I use. And I find that the best way of doing it is actually talking to people because, and again, this is where I integrate. So I always talk to a sample of people covering all the functions. So I talk to the one or two key project managers, and what I do is, if they tell me this is a difficult guy, don't talk to him, I say that's the guy I want to talk to.
Yes.
Okay, so I start with the ones that are perceived as troublemakers, and in the end it becomes quite obvious they're not troublemakers, they're just expressing their frustration with the process.
Yes,
so I talk to people, and then, the typical model of people, processes, systems, you look at all three, because in this case, literally all three were issues. There were definitely some people issues, and we're addressing that with training, some leadership management issues. There's definitely systems issues where tools are just not there to integrate and align, and the processes are not aligned. So, but you get this out by talking to people, and this is, I think, I always ask people, what's their superpower? My superpower is taking a lot of information from different perspectives and bringing it together into a single model. That's my superpower.
I've been thinking about it earlier as well, because you need to have a overall view, but you also need to go into the details. And some people get stuck in the detail. Some people only look overall and they miss a lot. And it's a different skill to do both, hey, to see the bigger picture, but also to see how the detail connects into it. And what's interesting, I also do these some management intervention things with groups of people, and where you started off with industrial psychology, never studied engineering, but morphed a little bit into that. I started on the engineering side and learned about psychology as I went on, and I get the same thing. I find that the best way to really get to what it is to have one-on-one conversations with individuals. It's amazing what comes in, and then you can see the trends, and you can follow up and see if it's only an individual thing or whether it's a group thing. There's a lot of power in that, and I found with AI we miss that. AI can't do that. There's really something special of human connections and human beings.
AI is a topic we'll discuss later, because if I open that, I don't want to open that discussion. So, so I want to give you a practical example. So this week, we were busy looking at the commissioning and handover processes, and we got some practical feedback from one of the gentlemen that recently went through a process. And after I read his comments, I took it back to the commissioning manager and I said, or subject matter expert, I said, please review it and tell me what you think. And he related it, some of it to quality and some of it to just the processes not being in place and so forth. So when I started going through it very carefully, I quickly realized that the comments that were made, some talk to the engineering deliverables at the start of the process not being well defined, the standards and requirements, and not being properly communicated to the EC. So this is the first thing now. So that's not clear, it's not communicated. So I pull this back to my engineering deliverables and I go and make sure, are my engineering deliverables sufficient? Do we qualify the standards and requirements in the engineering deliverables? Pull that through to the gate readiness review. Okay, then I go back and I connect it with contracts and I make sure that the contracting manager pulls it into the contract that gets prepared for the scope of work for the EC, and that the EC actually gets that as part of contractual requirement. Then I go through and I pull it through to quality management, because some of these issues come up as quality management issues at the end of the day. But if you deal with it throughout the value chain, proactively and reactively, because that's where root cause analysis comes in. If you define the why, the bottom why is the root cause, and there you will proactively address it. Okay, where the top why, which is superficial, that is a symptom, and you need to manage it on all levels. So you need to pull it through, and this is my superpower: being able to take one sentence and take it through to all the wires where it needs to connect, for it to be a whole system. Yeah.
But as you are talking, I get this idea of a spider web.
Yes.
Where you take this thing, so you are not only the drama queen now, you are the spider woman.
Okay, I like that. I like that, actually.
With that superpower, hey?
And it works with me.
We are creating an avatar here for Davido.
You made me think about something else I did. Many years back, I did a 2-year lessons learned project, which was on a very large program. And that's why the lessons learned took 2 years, because we did it per function within the project, but we also did it for each EC, as well as every supplier, manufacturer, the whole value chain, contracts, project controls, etc., etc. And that, for me, I think in that 2 years, I probably learned the most about projects, because I was forced to learn every single function and discipline in projects. And what do you do wrong, and what do you do right? Because we also looked at successes to say, how can we repeat successes? And but the learning from that was just absolutely immense. Yeah. You make me think. You see, this is an interesting exercise.
No, but that is what this is all about. And as you are talking, my brain goes haywire and trying to put my thoughts into my thoughts into words. Oh, you see, I can't even speak properly now. You also said that in Sasol, it was an amazing training ground where you got your real training, and that talks to this idea of experience. Now, I want to move a little bit in that direction, because often we say, "Oh, these old guys, they don't have the new technology, they don't know the new ways," and of course we always need to learn the new ways and the new technology. But what can you tell about real experience? I want you to go a little bit in that direction, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting one, and I'd like to relate it to what we see in industry today. So in industry today, we see a lot of young people, very ambitious, lots of tools and technology. AI really, I mean, every time you talk to anybody, they pull out some app and they go and search for a topic. Whereas the people with real experience, they would walk through a refinery or pull up a document and they can just see what's wrong from experience, because they lived it, not because they read it in a book or because AI told them. And this for me is a huge concern with AI. For another business, I help them with marketing, and I review the articles that goes to the website. And the articles I got, it just didn't make sense. I read it and then I'm like, because I know the product very well, that's why I'm asked to do this. So, because I also help them with product development. So I go through these documents and I just see that these articles are, nothing makes sense. So I asked them, who writes this stuff? And then they tell me it's AI generated. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So I really want to caution against that. I mean, I hope anybody who's listening here today before you grab your phone and get or your laptop and get an AI solution, go and talk to somebody that lived it. Most organizations now are, and I may be starting to put myself in the older category, because I am above my 50s. You asked for personal information.
You're not even grey.
Wilhelmine. So the thing is, what I would recommend is if young people battle with something, rather get a mentor. And, somebody that's either in the organization or that has retired, that still has a passion to share their knowledge and skill, and go and learn from them, talk to them. Even in this process that I'm working in at the moment, where we're streamlining the stage gate process, this is what I do. When I venture into an area which I'm not too comfortable with, because I'm not an expert in everything, even though holistically I can touch on everything, I find the experts and I work with them.
Yes.
And then it's amazing, the amount of knowledge you get from that. And I can't get the same knowledge by reading a book. I just can't. So it's really important to take the time and effort and work with people that have the knowledge and skills that's been there.
But what I see as well, many of our colleagues who has loads of experience, they still use AI just to put things nicely in
That's
a
okay
package, but they never
like
take it just like that.
That's
We
okay
always go
like
back
that.
and we say, okay, this section makes sense, but within context. And we always change it. You can never just use it raw. And you're going to get it wrong. The context is important. The experience is important. How to apply it to a specific problem is so important. And that you can only get with experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I do enjoy about the technology is there's so many apps now, Google apps, SharePoint apps, Microsoft apps, which I've started dabbling into that to try and help the projects move faster on certain things. And it's really user-friendly. If you adapt it and don't just grab a template and create your own templates, the applicability is just, I think there's so much we don't know that I wish I had more time to explore, but I'm making an effort these days to try and familiarize myself with all the apps out there.
But I also realize that can become a permanent thing that one don't get to apply it. I see knowledge is not a problem anymore. When we were younger, the problem was to get knowledge, but now knowledge is so readily available. And I think the effort goes into what knowledge must I go and get? Where is the right place to get we always said garbage in, garbage out. No,
there is too much.
Where to get the knowledge, and then I think that the missing link now is how to apply that knowledge to a situation. And I can see that in technical, but also in the psychology field. We know all these things. Then people will self-regulate or look at it themselves and maybe make the wrong connections. There's nothing like an objective person who has walked the walk. It reminds me of that story, and it's going to be my version. I can't remember the right version, but there was a problem on this factory, and they had all the people to try to solve the problem. They can't get it, and eventually they call this old woman who's been retired after months that they've struggled, and he comes and he makes an X. He says, this is your problem. 5 minutes in, and I don't know how much money he asked. And they said, how can we pay you this for all that little time that you spent? And he said, because I know where to put the cross.
Exactly.
I don't need to spend all the hours to be able to know where to put the cross.
But Wilhelmine, you've said it. It's spot on. In the StageGate world, we talk about independent peer review. There is nothing like independent peer review. And I've seen it how many times, even with all the standards and procedures and documents we're developing, you just miss your own mistakes also after a while. So, and you bring a experienced person in, put an eye on it, it takes them seconds to resolve. Yeah.
Another thing,
you cannot quantify experience.
You can't quantify it, no. Another thing I want to touch on is how you said you came into training with soft skills, people management, conflict resolution. And I find conflict resolution a very interesting topic to talk about, if we can explore that a little bit.
Okay.
No one likes conflict. I haven't really find anyone who likes bad conflict. Having a discussion and disagreement is a bit different, and debating something, but real conflict, I haven't found anyone liking it. But I find people, either because they don't know how to manage conflict, they come in a bullish way and just want to pounce it right, which normally don't resolve it, or they run away from it because they can't know how to handle that. Have you experienced that? And what is your best, if you can give me a 2-minute training on the one thing I must do differently, what would that be?
I'll give it one word, and that's listen. And I'll talk to that in a second. So I want to tell you where I got involved in training, and then I'll answer that question. So when I moved over to Sasol Technology, now I'm working with all these technical people. It's new for me, okay? So I just moved into this technical project environment. All these engineers were so bright. The level of intellect is totally above average. So people's skills did not feature high, EQ did not feature high, and it's not, and I mean, these were amazing people, but it wasn't important to them. They wanted to get the job done and use their intellect in doing so. So it's at that point where I developed my people skills training and conflict management training, and how to give performance appraisal feedback. It's actually in that context, and I developed it for technical people because they're a different breed. You can't put them in the same category as normal people. Technical people with high intellect, they're a different breed, and there's not one of these guys you and I work with daily that don't have a super high intellect. They are very intelligent people. So you need to take a bit of a different approach. And this is where the listening comes in. So I love using the term park your paradigm. And when I start any session and I facilitate a session, and it works so well, Wilhelmine, is I tell the guys, please, my biggest request today is for you to listen. But what does that mean? That means for today, you have to park your paradigm. You come with a frame of reference. And if you have that frame of reference in the back of your mind all the time, you will not hear what the other person has to say. And if I want shared meaning, you have to listen and you have to park your paradigm. Absolutely. It's the only way we can have shared meaning. So if you do that, you'd be amazed how people actually make an effort to listen. The other thing I do, which really works well, is I challenge them at the start as part of a bit of an icebreaker to say, what hat are you going to wear today? Are you going to be the catalyst? Now, this they understand, because in a plant, a catalyst is something that's going to bring the heat down, but increase the performance. Okay, so are you going to be the catalyst, which means you're going to help me today to make this a success? Or are you going to be the instigator? Or are you going to be, so I play it like that. Yeah. And then, or are you going to be the leader showing the way? Or you're going to be the quiet observer. And by doing that, you make people think about what role they play. But get back to conflict management, I think one of the most useful tips I can give is if there's real conflict, and I'm not talking constructive conflict, because again, technical people are different, they're a different breed. It might sound like conflict, but it's often not. It's just creative debate. It's creative debate. That's all it is. And if that is it, that's okay, because you walk out of there and there's no hard feelings. But if it's real conflict, it's always worth it to get an independent facilitator, mediator, to sort of facilitate the process you and I are talking about now, to sort of nudge them to park their paradigm, to listen, to paraphrase what the other person is saying so that the other person can hear what's being said. Because that's what facilitators are trained to do. Where if two people are just fighting about something, they don't know how to convey their message for the other person to actually hear what they have to say. And it's about that. We need to just try and listen.
I love what you're saying. And I mean, part of my journey also, I qualified myself as a professional coach. eventually, a long journey, but what an amazing skill to possess. That taught me how to listen. So also if I go into interventions, a lot of the thing is explaining to people what it means to really listen. And then the other thing that I believe is to have an open mind, because there's a lot of people in conflict that are not willing to change their minds. And that talked to me about that paradigm, park your paradigm that you're talking about. And yeah, I can also just say, absolutely, totally agree with that. A lot of problems can be solved by just implementing those and not come in with my preconceived ideas again. Park your paradigm now, not come with an answer, but come to really understand and to hear what's behind it. Yes. So I want to ask you, as you say, engineers are a different breed. I'm an engineer. I feel pretty normal, but I realize other people don't always see us as being normal.
You're not.
What do you love about engineers?
Yes, I would say everything. I really love engineers. I love the fact that they say what they think and they don't filter it. For me, normally people are trying to put barriers up and shade cloths over, and so that they try to filter stuff they share. Engineers don't filter. You will always know exactly where you stand with an engineer. So that's probably one of the most incredible characteristics I like. And then I really like the intellect that goes with engineering. I like the fact that engineers think about things and analyze them and don't just accept things. I like the fact that people ask questions and challenge and want to understand, Too many times some people are so passive. They just, whatever you tell them, they just take. I always sit in my meetings and I tell the guys, if you're going to be the passive, just observer, and you're not going to participate, I'm not sure I want you here. But you can say that to an engineer. You can't say that to other people, but you can. Because the thing is, I want you to buy into what the outcome is. So so I like the analytical nature and just the see what you get, challenge.
Now I want to ask you what you hate about them, but hate is maybe a strong word. What frustrates you the most of engineers?
Okay, I'm going to qualify which engineers, okay, because not all engineers. So you get engineers which are more conceptual, and then the discipline engineers tend to be more pedantic. So at times they get too pedantic, and they get stuck in the detail. If it's an I or a cross or a T, and that's where I get frustrated because I want to move on.
I know my husband is also in an engineering field, and now we find when we have lunch together, and my children are much better with their grammar, for instance, than I am. But as we are, they become so technical about absolutely everything. If you make one small mistake, they can't help themselves but to highlight it for you. And then I think, don't do it to me. But then I think I'm doing it to them as well. We do it without even realizing we are.
It comes with the proper, yes.
It comes with the territory.
That's difficult. Getting nitpicking, and then losing the bigger picture of what we're after. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with this independent peer review that you talked about on the StageGate model, yes, it's so good to get that feedback. But in my experience, Davida, there's been guys that I would hate them to be in my peer review because it felt that they pulled me apart and that I'm good for nothing. But then there were people who would sit in that would be so gentle, and they will still say the same facts, but they will give it in a way that doesn't feel like I'm the worst of the worst of the worst. They still acknowledge what I've done. So what is the best way that if you are the experienced person to give feedback that is constructive and not just so factual that you squish the poor young engineer
it goes back to play the ball and not the man. I think that's a very simple principle in basic people skills. And when you give feedback, it should not be to attack the personality of the person who did it. So if you just give feedback also, you won't say, why did you do this? You know, so now you're attacking the person. Whereas rather, if you consider doing it this way, you might get a better outcome. So you focus on the actual issue at hand, not on the person. But I think also you're touching on a more important issues. Peer reviewers should be chosen correctly.
Yeah,
I hope you won't choose a peer reviewer that will crush someone.
yeah.
That's the wrong person for the job. Yeah.
Yeah, and get some training to help people also too, because you can be the best expert out there, but that expertise cannot necessarily move the process forward at the end of the day.
One of the things we are also looking at now is, for instance, training for steering committees, because they tend to also give feedback and they're very harsh. And I think it's important that they realize their role. They're there to help. They're not there to pull apart. And so I think that's important. And with that, typically, we bring in all these people skills. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have the ability to convey a message in a way that the person will accept it, they just, what value are you adding? You're not adding value.
Yeah, you said that Sasol was the highlight of your career and how you learned. And I must say, Sasol has been my highlight, but it's also been my low light.
No,
There's been times where it's really been the worst experience. And what frustrates me sometimes with companies, they have these beautiful values and they're beautiful saying things to say our strength is in our people. And then some of the people really take that and they live that, and we can throw names out there if we want to. But I have found a few managers, and then they train the next generation that's maybe incorrect training, where they don't live what they are proclaiming. They are not invested in the individual. And when we talk about turnover and low morale in people, I've learned that they say your peers and your direct manager has the biggest influence on how people experience the workplace. So what do you say about that?
Well, I mean, for me, it starts at the top. Your top manager sets the culture. So whoever's your GM or your CEO, they set the culture. And then everything filters down. I'm almost scared to use some examples here. Because I wouldn't like to quote certain companies, but we've seen this in the past where you get a certain manager that is appointed in a position. I think one of the most typical examples that happen in the petrochemical environment is that in your project environment, somebody gets appointed that is an operations manager without project experience. And then they don't understand the project process, and their whole approach to what they want and how they make decisions is not suitable to projects. That is a big issue. And I think this is a big industry issue. Whereas if you've got somebody in that position that has an appreciation for projects and understands the stage gate process and how it funnels, and how you don't have extreme accuracy and stay in the first stage, in pre-feasibility, that basically there you only have an idea. I spend a lot of time. So this is actually one of my other highlights is I developed sponsor training. And I've developed multiple sponsor training versions by now, but it's all based on exactly the same model. And for me, that is so crucial, because if your sponsors don't understand what they're doing and how the stage gate works, they are the ones that can mess up a project. So sponsor training is, for me, absolutely fundamental. They have to understand the stage gate process, and they have to have the people skills to uplift and motivate people and not bring them down.
And I agree with you. In the ideal world, we want the culture to start at the top and then go down the layers. But I've been in my career in so many training sessions as I went up in management, and especially in the lower training, that the people were so frustrated to say, you want to train me to be like this. but my direct manager is not like that, even though the manager of the manager might have the right culture.
Yes,
So
yes.
sometimes it doesn't come down in the way we want it. So what advice do we give to this person who wants to do it in the right way, but have this, it's not, but this obstacle of someone who keep them from doing that? What advice do you have for that person?
That's a really difficult one because it depends how strong that person's personality and leadership style is.
And influence, yeah.
Yeah, so there's not a black and white answer on this. The dynamics will vary depending on the individual. For me personally, I would not give up. I would use my networks. So, there's always lots of people with influence. So I would do a bit of a stakeholder map and see who I can leverage to help me get my messages across. I do this on a daily basis whenever I battle with somebody to get a decision through, I go and think, okay, who can I influence? And then I start influencing those who can influence the person that I would like to influence. So you work the problem, and this is again, I think, where the engineering analytics and stuff comes in. You analyze this as a problem and you manage it like a problem. And
that is where a good mentor can help a lot. Hey, that's not your direct. But I think that makes it so much more important for a CEO or an MD to make sure they get rid of these managers and that does not support the culture. But sometimes I struggle to do that because that's their only subject matter expert. That is their only strong what I experienced person. But I have seen so many times, and I've used this analogy of milk. Changing the culture is like making cheese now. And the problem with that is cheese is the people, or cheese has culture in it. It has a recipe, it has a maker, it has all of that in. But if your milk that you make the cheese, you need one drop of sour milk to spoil the whole batch.
Yeah.
And people are scared to really attack, because what if this person leave? What if? But I have found we need to be so careful to allow that in companies.
Well, I think there's two things. One is you must first try and coach them to be different. So there's one example that I have where I worked with an engineering company, one of the big ones in South Africa, and they also came to me with the same request: high turnover, low morale. I did the same OD assessment as I did recently, and there the answer was quite clear. The head of the company that managed the projects, the head of projects, was the problem. He was a complete dictator. He didn't listen. He broke his people. That's what he did. Nobody wanted to work for him. And lo and behold, we started working with him. And I had to do all the feedback, which is difficult. It's not an easy thing to give people feedback like that.
Yes.
But it's so amazing. This guy was open to listen and to work on it, which he did. And it was years later that I saw the GM of this engineering company, and he said to me, Davida, you won't believe the change we experienced after you worked with this guy. And he turned around completely, and everybody now wants to work with him. So I think we must first try and resolve it and keep the skills if possible. Yeah. But there are examples where I would just get rid of the person.
I want to ask you, have you ever worked with someone who's not open to change?
So let me give you a practical example. So as a consultant, you try and keep clients, right?
Yes.
You don't. Only once in my career, left a job because I couldn't work with the individual. So there was a really great manager that I worked with. He was replaced with somebody else. And this person, my values just clashed completely. And then I lasted a month. And then I said, I have to, unfortunately, resign this job. So I canceled the contract. I didn't finish. I could not work with a person like that. He was completely domineering, listened to nobody, walked over people, left dead bodies left, right, and center. I couldn't live with that. I just
There are
couldn't.
people who are scared. They are scared to do that because they say, what if I don't get a salary? What if I've seen even people I coached in the workplace or business owners with very bad clients. And I haven't heard a story that if they took the plunge, that they were disappointed. Even the one business owner said, this client brings in 80% of my income, but they keep them busy 90% of the time.
Sure.
And eventually he chose to say, no, I can't carry on like that. So he lost 80% of his income, but within a month, he almost made double the income by smaller clients who were less demanding, and he had more time for other things. And for me, I was so scared with him for that decision, but it made the world of difference, and his stress levels came down, which made him more creative.
Absolutely.
In the end of the day.
Yeah. Something else I was thinking of that you made me think of, which I'm also passionate about, is stakeholder management.
Oh yes, yes.
And especially when we spoke about if you've got a manager that you don't really get along with, and how to manage that. And this is for me where stakeholder management comes in, where you leverage people with influence. But I think stakeholder management is such an undervalued skill. And I think a lot of us with more people skills training, we do it intuitively. We don't think about it. But what I try and do is I teach project managers to do it, and engineering managers, that they learn the skill of identifying people that you can leverage and how you can leverage it by doing stakeholder mapping, etc. So, but I just think that's an undervalued skill that we can harness much more on projects.
The funny thing is, like, I have this big thing when we go into change management that you must communicate. You must communicate. You can't over communicate. Communication and transparency is so important. And it makes me so mad when I see change without communication, without transparency. But then, even though I know all these things, and I look back at my own life and I realize I haven't talked to my children about this change. I haven't communicated this, and I haven't been transparent. It's so easy to point it out. It's so difficult to do that. And I think I have a lot of empathy with business owners or managers out there. There's so much to think about. There's so much to do. And that is where I find consultants who are coming in, trusted consultants. You get a lot of consultants that does not necessarily add value, but trusted consultants that can give that overview, that can give that reminders, remember. Because if you have 120 things to do, that just is the thing that can break the back of the camel. And to bring someone in to say, no, this is not that important. Maybe this is more important. If you do this one thing, you can tick off a lot of these other things. That is the thing. This whole thing of the driver and the outcome. So many times we are busy with the outcome, which takes a lot of energy to fix something. But because we haven't got the problem to get to the driver, and often if I can identify that driver very successfully, it's like a bicycle chain. Now, much less energy to change this, which will change the outcome at the end of the day. But sometimes we need that external perspective. It's very difficult to have all the knowledge, all the perspective in one person.
So you're 100% right. I mean, in one of the processes I'm busy with at the moment, so we're trying to fix the basic processes. But in this case, if the capital management process and capital approval process is not supporting the processes, because we can do everything perfectly between the gates, but if those gate governance processes are not smooth, the project managers have the same problem. They walk against the wall. And so I often, exactly as you say, you identify something that wasn't necessarily part of your scope, but is actually one of those real issues that if you fix this, you fix 10 problems. And this is the root cause. That's the root cause analysis. You've got the root, but then you've got the layers of symptoms above that. So you just dissolve those symptoms by addressing the root.
Oh, Davida, I think there's so much more that you and me can talk about. And when you say something, it triggers something in my mind. It seems when I talk, we trigger. So we definitely need to have a take two of what we are doing now. I really enjoyed our session together. Thank you for the time and the knowledge that you so freely share in this session. It's really being appreciated.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. It was an absolute pleasure and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
With that, we gave you another episode of OTC Unplugged with one of our consultants. Stay tuned. You never know who we're going to interview next. Goodbye.